Reuben, welcome to the Leaders Who Care series.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me.
I was kind of hoping you'd be in uniform, pretty cool, but I don't know if that. I don't think that's going to make the difference because you're helping a lot of uniforms. Let's start in the always the best place to start. If you can, and I always have to make this, especially for men, I have to make this point. If you can briefly introduce yourself, but tell us about who you are. Tell us about where you're from originally, where you are now. Tell us about your family a little bit. Maybe even tell us something you've never told anybody and you want to reveal to the world right now. I don't know, but we'll get to the business and the cause in a minute. But tell us who you are and a little bit about you.
Okay. Well, I'm Reuben Ramirez, a retired assistant chief from the Dallas Police Department, did 29 years with the Dallas Police Department. Yeah, I think my story to becoming a police officer is fairly unique. I grew up in South Texas, small town down in South Texas, the son of a hay farmer. My parents were hay farmers. So a very slow paced yet hardworking childhood, but really nothing that really leaned towards or influenced becoming a police officer. I think if I look back at how I became one, I think more than anything, I just didn't want to farm anymore. That was hard. That was hard work.
So did you have brothers, sisters?
Yeah. I had an older brother. Still have an older brother, and he's
That's
5 years
good
older
to
than me.
know.
Yeah, I'd probably make that clarification. And a younger sister. Um, Coincidentally, all of us are in the public service type field. My brother is now a retired colonel from the Air Force,
Um,
and my little sister teaches English in junior high. So all of us went into the public service fields, I guess, probably as a result of not really liking the farming life in a small town. Uh, but then became a police officer really just one day in college, just looking at reading the newspaper, and I knew there was a job fair. Dallas PD was looking for.
so we'll get back to that in a minute.
Okay.
Men are all the same. They keep going to that all the time.
Yeah, you got to stop me.
Um, your parents are from where?
Well, so my parents are both from Floresville, Texas, which is down in, just south of San Antonio, heading towards Corpus Christi. And they're just, even if you went generations back, their families have been in Texas since Texas was not part of the United States, since it was owned by Mexico. So long, deep roots tied to South Texas.
And what kind of farming did they do? What
Hay
was
farming. Yeah,
hay
we
farming and but also animals or just I mean hay farming.
no, we've had animals in the past, cows, we've had some cattle, but for the most part, we grow the hay, cut the hay, turn it into bales of hay, round bales, square bales, and we sell it to farmers. We sell it to hay farmers, or we sell it to cattle farmers, to horse farmers, and sometimes even to different the motorcycle races would use hay bales to outline their tracks, things like that. So yeah, we had contracts all over the place, and then we got to work.
Is that where people started saying, "Hey, Reuben, what's up?"
Yeah, just a lot of puns, a lot of hey, and then no, and it's kind of looking a different direction. Okay.
Well, I find it fascinating because it's actually happening right now where people are paying to go to farms and live on the farm for a week or a day or 2 days or whatnot to get that grounded experience.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's I think it's ironic. I couldn't wait to leave the farm life and get to the big city to be a police officer, and now I can't wait to get back. I think there's therapy out there, and people are realizing it. So yeah, I don't doubt that for a minute. That's
I've seen Airbnbs have airstreams and whatnot on their farmland, and people going and staying there just to get back to nature, whatever you want to call it. Back to basics, I guess, is the goal there. But so you mentioned you as a kid. By the way, do you have any kids yourself?
I have two boys. I have a 22-year-old and a 16-year-old, sophomore in high school now. Yep.
Nice. Well, that's the legacy right there. Type of thing. So good for you. So compared to them, what were you like as a kid? Were you like playing police officer, fireman when you were a kid? Video games? What were you up to?
No, I think I probably spent they were way better kids and teenagers than I was. I think I spent most of my time trying to stay out of trouble. I think more than anything, I played sports, so that kind of helped me once I got into high school. Played football, so had a pretty good group of friends and coaches that influenced. So I think that kind of kept me. But both my boys, same thing. They were athletes, just better kids. They listened a lot better than I did. They weren't in as much mischief as I think I got in.
So you prevented them from doing the stuff that you thought you probably shouldn't have done or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, they followed some my instruction there, unfortunately, and stayed on. They had really good groups of friends. I think if there's one thing I remember that I was most appreciative of, especially my older son, he had a really good core group of friends, and I think they did a really good job kind of policing themselves, each other, and keeping them on the straight and narrow. And then my younger son, he's just a determined little kiddo. He's really hardworking, academic. He's a student athlete. He's a wrestler. So I don't know if you're familiar with any student athletes in wrestling, but it's a tough sport. There's a lot that's involved in staying within the margins there, and he's really committed there and does a great job. So I'm proud of both of them.
They do a lot of hugging, those wrestlers. Um, I remember in school the wrestlers. That wasn't my thing, but the wrestlers were amazing. Hey, your journey. If you start with education, you did Bachelor's of Applied Science. You did a Master's in Humanities. What were you envisioning at the time?
You know, I don't, at the time, I don't know. I've always been a kind of a general studies type guy. I've been a liberal arts type major. I never specialized in anything. I didn't really like just criminal justice, and I didn't really like poli sci. I wanted to know I wanted to get a broader, uh, I guess, just sense of the different disciplines
Yeah.
and see what grabbed me. I'll tell you, as I look back, even to both of my degrees, they were just really, huge blessings in my life because what they wound up lending to was this curiosity that I had in every situation as a police officer and even as an executive. I always wanted to know the broader, I guess, just the broader scope of that situation. Like there's behavior, and we can look at it as this action, therefore this consequence, or we can look at it even broader to say what influenced that action, and how much did the situation play in kind of this incident, and understanding that I think you do get a better sense of humanity. You understand that most people out there are really, really good. I think most people want to be good, but
Hmm.
there are things that disrupt that pathway. And it's important to know those things. I think especially if you're a leader in a position like policing, where you are making this decision not only on policy and kind of the ramifications of how we police or how it affects the community, but really just understanding how to better police your community is really in part to understand what is influencing them. And I think my education gave me that broader curiosity, and it's been God sent. I've
You
really
know,
appreciated
yeah, no, it's a good answer. Every position, but especially like that, the core is understanding people and caring about people, and because people will. I compare a lot of things to sports. Obviously, a player will do anything for the coach that believes in them, cares about them, trusts them to do whatnot. How did it evolve into you joining the police force, and describe a little bit how your career evolved from point one, if you will, all the way to the assistant chief of police in Dallas.
I think originally I was just looking for a job. I knew that I was in college. I needed to figure out what I was going to do with my life. Dallas Police was having a job fair. I decided to attend. Me and a group of friends. We were eligible. We applied and went through the process. And by the end of the process, I was the only one of my colleagues who was still, I guess, standing. And I was given the opportunity to go into the academy. It was funny. We all got weeded out, or they all got weeded out for something, whether it was the academic test, the psychological test, the physical agility test. It was something. And so I was left with this decision, like, do I try this? And I talked with my folks about it, and they were supportive. And at 22 years old, I just decided that I'm going to give it a try and went through the academy. Didn't really like the academy. It seemed like everyone I made friends with was like getting weeded out of the academy. We started like with 40 recruits and only 20 graduated. So it was that was a whole nother journey. And I remember distinctly I talked to my dad about this, and I said, "Hey, Dad, I don't know that this police academy thing is working out." And I was like, I don't know that I like it. I get yelled at all the time. I'm running all the time. It's really not all that great. And he said to me, he said, "Son," he goes, you can quit." And he says, "As soon as you graduate." And he says,
Right.
"But you're not gonna quit. You put our," and he was always so good about this. He says, if you put our family name on something, you do it the best you can." He didn't see, he always, he reminded me, and even my grandpa did, you didn't have to be perfect, but if you put our name on it, do the best you can. Give it everything you got. Give it all your effort. And so I did. And then by the time I had graduated the academy some 9 months later, there was no looking back. I wanted to continue. And so my first assignment, I was assigned to Southwest Oak Cliff. It was a busy substation, busy division for the city of Dallas. And I was on the evening shift, third watch. And I started my police career. And it was just, every part of it really, as I look back, was just, it was eye-opening, to say the least. But I found myself from the beginning of my career and throughout my career, I always seem to find good people around me, just good examples of leaders. I had good supervisors, I had good police officers around, and so I think I got a head start always because I had some good people to kind of to follow. But one of the things I noticed about myself that really stood out even early on in my career was that I was always a bit of a contrarian. I always looked at what we did and I always questioned, like, is this the right way to do this? And are these people doing it the right way? And what made them know how to do it the right way? And so there were things in policing that I questioned and I wanted to do a little differently. And I'll give you the audience just a little example of what that is.
Yeah.
This was now just mind you for background. This was back in the mid '90s when I started my police career, and cops were there was this idea back then that when the cops showed up, you know this command presence was there that you listened to the cops and everyone needed to listen, and you almost needed to do it the cops way, or else it was some sort of like offense against the police. And I never really completely endorsed that. Like I thought there was some of the gold, some of the information we're looking for is in the dialogue. And while you don't want it to get out of hand, there's pieces that we needed to listen to in there. And I felt like I was a cop early on that always wanted to hear what people had to say. I just really, I didn't subscribe to this whole like, keep quiet. We're here. We'll ask the questions. I kind of wanted to dialogue a little bit more. And I think I really, what I took away from that really quickly was people sometimes just want to be heard. And if you give them the chance to be heard,
Yep.
it's powerful what you'll find. And I'll pause there because I think that actually plays a role in later on in my career, some of the elevation into the upper ranks, and particularly some of the program that I built that we'll talk about later in the show.
Well, it's not a surprise. It's definitely a lacking right now. People being active listeners out there. And there's programs that we work with, like Non-Flict is one major program where coaches people how to look at conflict as just different ideas and to really be active listeners to the other person. And even if you still disagree, um, it's amazing how the edge is taken off when someone knows that they've at least been heard as to what's going on rather than being told all the time. And it's a balance. And, again, I compare a lot of things to sports. The players know the coach is the leader, but the players will perform when they know that the coach is open to input and then make a decision type of deal. So I hear you. And it's funny how it might relate to, well, our firm was actually founded on the premise that business will do better when you're doing good. Your business is protecting and serving, and yet what you're talking about makes total sense. It'll do better when you're doing good with the people that you're
Yeah,
protecting and serving.
yeah, so true, so
Um,
true.
Talk a little bit about you know, maybe some things, some examples of things that really stand out in your career that made an impact on you, situations that happened that made an impact on you. Do you have any examples of that that come to mind?
Well, for one, I think as I look back in my career, I really had a very successful police career, and I look at the assignments that I applied for, the promotions that I was given. I mean, I always seemed to get the assignments I wanted or the promotions I was aiming for, and I just I was very fortunate again from just having the right people around me, the right types of influences, but really just having this really neat combination of work ethic that I think I developed from my dad with just being a farmer and my mom being a farmer's wife and just kind of giving everything. I always say my mom is the most selfless woman I know. She does everything for other people. And I really think that, without even realizing that I was absorbing or paying close attention to that, I feel like my career was a lot of working really, really hard, but yet always wanting to figure out how I could serve or I could help. So it gave me a lot of specialized assignments. I was on things like violent crime task forces. I was always on some sort of violent crime initiative, some sort of initiative from the top of the organization that said, we've got to go do this. This is happening, whether it were drugs at the time or it were gangs later, or it was just violent crime in general. And I was always selected to be on those types of roles. Eventually, I was put on federal task forces, so where we were taking police resources and coupling them with some of our state and federal partners and doing the same thing on a broader level. And promotions within that time, a lot of really good assignments like criminal intelligence, major crimes. I was undercover for a lot of years, my career as a really detective or young detective. And then that evolved into this role that was what we called the legislative affairs liaison. And what they did was they selected a police officer or two from the major cities to go represent major cities in as it related to proposed legislation and how legislation might impact what we did from an operational standpoint, from an engaging our community. And I was selected for that role too. And so this gave me a whole new, broader exposure to a part of why we were doing what we did in policing, how it originated, and then got a seat at the table to really weigh in on it. So again, I think just a lot, if I really, had to frame my police career, it was just a lot of opportunity. And I think a lot of it was because I, I, I didn't have strong opinions about just policing exclusively. I wanted to understand how we could do this job better and if there were a way to do it. And I think it just led all the way to being promoted into the command staff and then the executive ranks and all the way to assistant chief.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've known some police officers have been friends of mine in Miami, for example, and you know, you decided to, well, you decided not to go for the chief role and whatnot. And I know you had probably a lot of interaction in the private sector as a police officer also. And I've talked to a lot of friends where they've been put in rough situations, bad people situations, and whatnot, and time and time and time again. Talk to me about um, the how that can clearly, if we're put in situations like that, that could affect your mindset, it can affect your opinion, it can affect how you act, how you believe people are, it could wear you down. How that all came into play where you didn't go for the chief of police, you went into the private sector, you started understanding about trauma and what impact it has on you and police officers, and then we'll get into actually what you're doing about it. But talk about how that evolved.
Yeah, I think once I was an executive in particular, I was always at the internal affairs hearings where our officers who had been under investigation for some sort of misconduct were now in a hearing setting, and we were listening to what they had done, what the internal affairs division had found, and making a decision on whether or not they could continue to be a police officer. And I think just kind of repeatedly listening to these officers who, in only a few short years after the start of their career, found themselves in these compromising positions, sometimes with alcohol, sometimes with anger, sometimes just dysfunction in their relationship. And I couldn't help but wonder, because I had just been, I had 25, years earlier at the time, I had been in a similar seat where I was a new aspiring police officer. I wanted to do good. And so I wondered how we got there. And I couldn't help but think we're missing something. But the commonalities that I heard in from these officers who were in this precarious position of really on the verge of losing their job were things that related to trauma. They would cite situations that they had been to, calls that they had been to,
Hmm.
as something that had led to some of the difficulty coping, I guess. And I couldn't help but think we were missing something. There is an incredibly high consumption of secondary trauma. And to your point, even in my career, I had seen very difficult things. I had seen humanity do some of the worst,
Right.
unthinkable things, and I had seen some of those threats, directed at me and my colleagues, and I had experienced probably the piece that I talk about more than I think a lot of my colleagues do is I had experienced fear. And this is something we don't talk about in the police circle. Like, we're not supposed to have fear. But what I knew was that some of these situations were scary. They just scared me. And I don't know why they scared me. They just did. I didn't feel good. And so I think when I know that fear is a very powerful emotion as well, it'll as men in particular, and I'll speak for men only because I guess because I can, but as a man, we don't like to be afraid. And when you're wearing a uniform and you're looking introspective and you recognize that the emotion I'm feeling right now is fear, but yet the culture doesn't really make room for that. That's a difficult environment. My choices are very limited. I can get negative and kind of mask it. I can get I guess I could get numb to it if I chose to. I could do these things, but I think there was a gravitation to I need to hide this emotion.
Right.
And I really didn't want to hide that emotion. I wanted to, because I know that you take away the power from it when you don't hide it. And so I wanted to kind of be real about it. And so anyway, point being is that I knew that there was something we were missing in the law enforcement profession. We were missing something because we shouldn't be taking such a hard pivot in our career so early on. And I think that I never let go of that, and I held that. And then for myself, when I did my own introspective look, I knew that this high consumption of emotional, secondary trauma was starting to make me see things a little different, and I fought it. I was always trying to fight it. Now full disclosure, I'm a faith guy. I believe in faith. That's where that's where I'm not as good at it as I should be, but I know the power of it, and so I try to direct as much as I could into that kind of space and faith, and use that to kind of help navigate my way.
Well, I find it interesting always the balance of police officer where it could be life or death, or a sports coach to win the championship, or whatever it may be. It's all relative and it's all felt by people in different in different ways, where people are sometimes looking for that strong leader that's not afraid. But on the other hand, vulnerability is something a leader has also in sharing with other people. So you get in relationship with them rather than not a controversial, but a combative relationship also. And that's going to suck the energy out of a person too, in a way where you've got to be strong in some of those scenarios. They talk about the Industrial Revolution. The fourth Industrial Revolution is really about technology and now AI, especially, et cetera. But the fifth Industrial Revolution is about humanity. And it's kind of what we're talking about. And it kind of goes back to what you talked about of why you did the education you did, to know what's going on behind the behavior and whatnot. So describe now, what you're doing about this, what you're doing at Versaterm to enhance responder health and wellness solutions. And then the whole thing about the exciting checkpoints that you shared with me. Talk about what you're doing about it now and what's happening.
Well, so the backstory. So I built that program called Checkpoints with DPD, and I once that was up and running, and I saw what it was doing, and we'll circle back around to that to talk more in depth. But I became I just I was a person who was interested in the market of wellness. I wanted to know what was out there externally in the world to help supplement or a tool to help supplement what our efforts were in the PD to help with the emotional health part of policing. And I came across the program. It's called Mindbase. It's a subproduct of the company I now work for, Versaterm, and they had a piece of technology that was interfacing into CAD, our computer-aided dispatch center, and it was pulling out all of the loss of life calls that officers were going to. It was capturing them and putting them up on display for whomever within a police organization to be able to see cumulatively what our men and women were consuming. And I thought, wow, this is fascinating, right? Like this is what has been missing. We've needed to look at this. If we were ever going to talk about secondary trauma, if we were ever going to talk about emotional health and the challenges of policing, we first needed to know what our men and women were consuming. And I thought, here I am, a 29-year police veteran, and I can't tell you how many loss of life calls I've been to. I can't tell you how many suicides I've been to, how many fatality car crashes, or how many homicides. I can't tell you how many times I've done CPR on someone, put a tourniquet on someone, or put a chest seal on someone. And that is something that I believe was so profound, because there's not a police officer listening to this who can answer that question definitively. No one knows how many suicides they've been to, how many homicides they've responded to, how many fatality car crashes. And if you don't know that, that's a problem. And secondly, it should be a rally call for every organization out there to say, hey, wait a minute, if we're really going to get serious about emotional health and wellness, we first have to know what the real experience of being a police officer, first responder is. And part of the way that you know that is by knowing what they have consumed. We're all products of our own experiences, right? Like we are. And when you take that number, with it, just any one of those components, and you really look at it, let's just take the fatality car crash. Every single person on the freeway or at an intersection who witnessed that fatality car crash, whether they drove by afterwards or during it, what they saw, what they witnessed, impacted their life, probably changed their life if they witnessed it.
Right.
But that was a life-changing event to that witness or to that person who was involved. But yet to the police officer, it happens repeatedly. And there is no concessions made for that life-changing experience. You just go on to the next call. And at some point,
it's kind of like sandpaper just
yeah,
wearing you down.
yeah. And at some point, it does take its toll. And so I joined this company, Versaterm, to really take the checkpoint program that I built in Dallas, which I think is revolutionary. I think it will change the world of law enforcement. And if it's adopted, it is not a replacement to anything that's currently being done. It is a supplement. It is a precursor. It's really the first step of what needs to be done to make our men and women raise an eyebrow really to the importance of this cumulative trauma. But you need a technology component with it too, because we're all strapped for resources. It's my program is manual initially, which I think is needed initially because there's got to be that human interaction. But at some point, because of the resources that we're strapped with and the staffing, we've got to wing off of the labor intensive piece and supplement it with an automated piece. And so that's what Versaterm does with their Mindbase platform. It's fantastic. And so now I am an ambassador of wellness for this technology company. I travel the country. I talk about the checkpoint strategy, and then I talk about the Mindbase platform and how those two complement each other, and how if built correctly, if adopted and built correctly, we stand to change everything about the first responder profession and law enforcement in particular.
And not to maybe state the obvious, improve the performance, the results of the police officer, probably improve attracting police officers to be attracting individuals to be police officers because of that caring.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. Like, if you listen to any law enforcement podcasts right now, or really just any reports or coverage on policing, you will hear 3 or 4 main themes constantly. One of them is the difficulty recruiting right now. And it is difficult. There's a smaller pool of applicants who want to go in the police profession. The second thing we will hear about pretty often is attrition, our difficulty in retaining our resources. Police officers are leaving the profession at an unprecedented rate. The two other things that you hear are things that we've been hearing for about really about the last 10 years. It's our ability to fight crime. How are we going to reduce crime? How are we going to reduce violence in our communities? And then the last thing, it was extremely popular over the last 10 years, has been how do we better engage our community? How do we build relationships and inroads in our communities? All four of those are all incredibly tied to the emotional health of our men and women. You will not engage your community with the respect and the dignity and all of the other things that we demand as police leaders of our officers and that our community demands. You won't do it if your mind isn't right. You won't do it if your emotional health is compromised. You will never be able to fight crime at the level that we expect our police officers to if their minds aren't healthy. They just won't. They won't be able to execute they won't be able to be as safe. They won't be able to be as meticulous as we demand of them. From the mechanics, the operation, the strategy, you've got to have healthy emotional state. You have to have a healthy mind. And then, I mean, it just goes without saying, if you're not healthy, you're not gonna meet your recruiting goals. If you're not gonna meet your retention goals. And we really, quite frankly, we don't want to recruit into an unhealthy environment, and we don't want to retain our resources if they're not healthy. So it makes more sense from a fiscal standpoint as well, from a return on investment. We need to double down on an emotional health strategy that not only works and makes sense, but one that is receptive by our men and women in law enforcement. That's really one of the obvious pieces we missed. We have, in our big brains, come in and said, hey, we're going to buy you a piece of technology and this is going to make you healthier. Well, no, it's not without the right groundwork done. Or we're going to hire clinicians, or we're going to send you to training. That's the big one. Everyone thinks, oh, you know what? Our police officers aren't acting right. Let's send them to training. Well, everyone who's ever been to or had any type of education or been to any type of training knows that training and education is really only as good as the student is willing to listen to it or absorb it. And there's a lot of things that need to go into that training to make that student receptive or interested in that training. The checkpoint strategy covers all of those. And again, it's built by first responders for first responders. They like it, and that's probably one of the biggest pieces that has been missing from the whole equation of getting our men and women healthier.
Yeah, I think it's so right on and probably duplicatable into business, into sports, into everything except you're at the highest level with doctors because you're talking potentially life and death, not just winning a championship or winning a contract or things of that nature, which makes it even more significant. And then knowing how to balance the like you talked about being strong and a leader to confront and protect people but also then being able to hear and listen, to people and vice versa. It's funny because again, in sports, you always have to go back to the basics, and certainly a small town is different than a big city. But you got to know the community, you got to know the business owners, you got to know people, and then they'd support you too because they know you. And um, totally different. But Spectrum has a commercial where all their people they're defining and saying they're just like you. They buy their groceries at the same store you're doing. They do this, they do that, and they work for Spectrum at the same time. And in a way, it's kind of the same thing. The police officers are human beings and citizens of the same community, and they have, et cetera. So I think it's a spectacular program, and I'm glad we were able to highlight here. And we say in LA we have to leave people wanting more so we can do a sequel. So we may have to do a sequel. But I got one more question on this part. The pandemic was in 2020, and I had a client of mine tell me in 2021, he said, Mark, it was the year that flew by slowly. And I always thought, what a great line, because sometimes we look back and it feels it was like yesterday and yet years ago. And now we're in 2025 already. And with that and everything that's gone on, including what we just talked about, what are you most grateful for? And certainly, although I may know the answer, what are you most hopeful for?
Yeah, grateful for, I think it's been a rough ride. There's no doubt. We came out of, the post-pandemic world, opened our eyes to to really things that, you know, many of us in our generation hadn't really considered before. How something, could come in and really, compromise everything that we knew, our existence, our life, our routines, and it did bring a really strong, amount of fear. And fear, like I said earlier, very powerful emotion. And so I think it put all of us on notice, just as a really as species. Like, here's what we're up against. There are things that are powerful that exist out here, and and so I think that uneasiness really, while we were at a tipping point there with that, in that precarious position. I think in the police profession now we saw a social justice movement about, hey, we need to defund the police. Policing is not right. There's parts of it that are, and it got it got the nation's attention, even broader than that. And so it put a lot of this, this already difficult time that we were in an even more precarious place for policing, and it challenged us, and it really did. And being a faith guy, I do believe that, there is no suffering that happens without purpose. These are difficult spots, but if you navigate them right, with a strong concentration of care, with a strong concentration of listening, you can find the next step, and then the next step to really build and better a profession, to really build and better our communities, society. And I think what I'm most grateful for is that situation, as difficult as it was on both fronts, it gave us this opportunity to really pivot and be better. But we're not there yet. I'm not waving a victory flag by any means.
Right.
We have the right grounding now to be able to do something powerful, something that is life changing, something that is revolutionary to our men and women, both as public servants as well as just community and society. And what I mean by that is that we've got everyone's attention right now, Mark. We've got everyone's attention. We are all really scratching our head right now, saying, which way do we go next? Like, what is the right thing? There's a lot of uncertainty out there. But in this uncertainty, I have a formula that says you take an emotional situation, any emotional situation, and you plug in a person of influence, a person of true influence, and you do it at just the right time, that you create the optimal opportunity for change. And that's the situation we're in right now. We have an emotional situation on many different fronts. And if we plug in the right influencers, whether it's leaders who care, whether it's people who built the checkpoint strategy or all of the other fantastic strategies that are out there, if we synchronize right now and combine our influence in this emotional time and do it at just the right time, then you create the optimal opportunity for change. And that opportunity for change can be a more loving society, a more embracive society, a more together recognition that what unites us is way greater than what divides us. And we have the ability right now to do something huge. I think the program, the checkpoint program, which I think we're going to wind up talking about more in depth on a different show, it's done it for law enforcement. It is the law enforcement agencies who use it say this has revolutionized our culture. It has changed culture. We talk more about this. We are getting to the resources. We are supporting each other. Most importantly, we're sharing our difficult stories so that someone else doesn't have to go through the same thing we went through. This thing can be relayed in fire departments, dispatch centers,
Right.
emergency hospitals, schools, and our community at large. This is infusing good into our societies. It is just infusing empathy, compassion, and support with that same checkpoints formula in any emotional situation. A person who genuinely cares, empathetic, compassionate, with a direction and guidance, not to the bars or alcohol, not to negative, not to suppressing it, not to, something that's impossible to do, like, pretend it didn't happen, or like in policing, we say, oh, just leave it in your locker. Don't take it home. Impossible. Can't do that. But when you do those things, you create just an endless opportunity for a different life, for something healthier, for something more encouraging, more supportive, and that is what we all need right now. So I'm excited to share it. Whenever we do, I'm excited. I mean, I'm always appreciative that you were so open to hearing about it, and for the people that got us together. But again, I think we can do some great things together. I'm really excited about the possibilities of the future.
Yeah, and I'm really grateful that well, I have a new friend. That's always grateful for that, and that you are a leader who really does care. And I think it's we everybody wants to belong. It's the thing that fills people's hearts and souls more than anything, and we're actually all on the same team, which is kind of interesting. So, mental health has finally come to the forefront that it is something you've got to talk about and listen about, and which is what you're doing to get better. It's no more just get out there and shake it off type of stuff that they used to tell guys, especially. So, congratulations on something spectacular that I think can be duplicatable, and I think people would support 1,000,000% because they know what the purpose is. So thanks so much for sharing, and we'll have to have a sequel.
Look forward to it. Let's do it.